All right, good evening, everybody. It's a new microphone I have to get used to. All right, so welcome to the June edition of the Schoodic Institute Summer Lecture Series. Really excited to be here with everybody, both in person as well as those joining us via Zoom. And so Schoodic Institute, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. Our mission is to be a center for inspiring science, learning, and community for a changing world. I'm Nick Fisichella, President and CEO with Schoodic. And so I do want to thank the sponsor of our lecture series, Bar Harbor Bank and Trust, for making this possible, making this be a free event for the community. Also, thanks to you all and to all of our supporters for also making this lecture series possible, as well as the work of tonight's speakers that we're going to be hearing from members of the Schoodic Institute science team. It's, I feel like one of my great fortunes in my job to be able to work with and for this team that you're going to meet tonight and to learn a little bit about them and their passions and the work that they get to do. And you know, they are really intentionally changing conservation. They're changing conservation science, practice, language, and engagement, and really changing it to be more inclusive, to be more positive, to be more forward-looking, and ultimately to be more effective. And so it's really exciting to be able to work with them and for you all to learn a little bit more tonight. And you know, they're advancing what I think of as a more effective model for conservation science. This is science that's developed hand in hand with managers and with those who make a living off the lands and waters. This is science that's embracing many ways of knowing to understand rapid change and develop solutions. This is science with and for the people. And this science is making 140 plus years of really paying attention here in Acadia available and accessible to scientists and to really help us to unveil the rapid changes that are happening here that can be a little difficult to see otherwise through the fog that is our short-term memories. And this science is developing on-the-ground climate change adaptation solutions. And it's science that's building the next generation of conservation professionals. Those young folks who are going to be spending their careers the next several decades really working on the response to rapid changes that we're already seeing play out on the landscape today. So, and this team is really building an inclusive and thriving community of science. And so thank you all for being here and being part of our community of science. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Catherine Schmidt, who's the Science Communications Specialist with Schoodic.
Thanks so much for coming, everybody. It's my great pleasure to introduce my esteemed colleagues on the science team here at Schoodic Institute tonight. And I'm also gonna, we're hoping that all of you will get a little bit involved tonight, and we wanna test your knowledge of science in Acadia. And so the sort of first question, and these are gonna be for those of you on Zoom, you can just type in the chat. So most of them are like true or false or sort of raise your hand questions. And so the first question is true or false. So raise your hand or type true if you think it's true, that science is named in the legislation creating Acadia National Park in 1916. True or false? Science is named in the enabling legislation creating Acadia National Park in 1916. So I don't see a lot of hands up, but that is true. So science is actually one of the reasons why Acadia was created and made a national park as a place to do science. And we're going to hear a little bit more about that and our role in science in Acadia from Emma Albee, Science Information Specialist at Schoodic Institute. Emma started working for Acadia National Park in 2013, and then that fall she transitioned to working with Schoodic Institute and has been here ever since. So welcome, Emma.
Okay, so tonight I'm going to be talking about the community of research in Acadia National Park. So here is an example of research that has been happening in Acadia National Park for this year. So this is someone who is helping with monitoring for amphibian crossings across roads in Acadia National Park. So Marisa Monroe and Noah Charney are working at University of Maine, Orono, and they have a project studying this. And so this is an example of one of the many research projects that happens in Acadia. And this actually happens at Schoodic Peninsula as well. And so first, I wanted to go over the process. So people who want to come and do research in the park. So people like Marisa and Noah at University of Maine, or people, park staff, Schoodic Institute staff. So you'll be hearing more tonight about some of the other projects. And then projects from people at other colleges and universities, such as College of the Atlantic, and other organizations who want to come and do research in Acadia National Park need to apply for a research permit. And so this is a screenshot of the database where these people can go in and submit a research permit application. And then I go in and approve the permit, and then they can go back in after their work is done and submit annual reports and final reports once their project is finished. And so this process is a way to gather information about the research happening so that we can work with the researchers to help them get the most out of their project. It's not just more paperwork that needs to happen in order for them to get what they need to get done. It helps both parties. And so this is a chart of the number of research permits in the whole park. And so you can see it's been increasing over the past 2 or 3 decades, but it's been pretty consistent in the last like 6 or 7 years. We did have a dip in 2020 due to COVID. We actually stopped issuing research permits for a little bit because of worries of safety in the park, but you can see it bounced right back up the next year. And so we've been pretty consistent at like 84 or 85 permits a year over the last 6 years. And so now I'm going to talk about where the research happens. So just to get you all familiar, this is a map of Acadia National Park. I chose to not include Idaho on this map just because there isn't a whole lot of research that happens out there. So this is Mount Desert Island on the left and then Schoodic Peninsula on the right. And so this is a map of all of the research locations in the park. So there's 1,230 locations where permitted research happens. And you can see it's spread out over most of MDI. And the park is outlined in white. I don't know if you can see it very well, but the research is spread out all over the park, both on MDI, and also there's a lot that happens on Schoodic Peninsula. And so this is all of the research. And then this is a map of research that happens that has kind of what I call loose ties to Schoodic Institute. So some of that is permits that are by Schoodic Institute staff. Other permits are by Second Century Stewardship Fellows, or now what we're calling Acadia Science Fellowship. And so this is a partnership with Schoodic Institute, the park, and other organizations to help get some more research that happens in the park. And so Marisa is Acadia Science Fellow, so she is one of these examples. We also have C, so Schoodic Education Adventure Projects. So some of the people that come to do that, so that's a multi-day residential outdoor program led by Acadia National Park educators for middle school students. And so some of what they do is collect data and do research in the park. And then there's also Earthwatch projects. And so Earthwatch is a group that brings citizen scientists to Schoodic. And so they also collect some data. And so then this is just a map of Schoodic Institute staff research permits. So that's 243 locations. And you can see it's still spread out all over Mount Desert Island, and then as well as some on Schoodic Peninsula. And then this is Schoodic Peninsula zoomed in a little, so you can see that there is research quite a bit that happens on like Fraser Point area on the kind of top left-ish, and then a lot that happens around the point and the campus and places like that. And then, so what do we do with all this research? So we have 85 projects every year. And so we archive reports, data, and journal articles that come from those projects. And so those are available to the public and for people to look at, either the public or other researchers. We invite researchers to give lunch and learn presentations, so they can do those either at the beginning of their talk, like Marisa and Noah came and did one, and they were able to talk with park staff and other partners and help form their project. So it would give them more information on what they needed to do and how they could work with park staff. And then other times people come and do lunch and learns at the end of their project, so they're able to share what the results are and how that can help with park managers to manage the natural resources in the park. And those are available on Schoodic's YouTube in case you're interested in any of them. We also present and network at the Acadia Science Symposium. So that's an event every fall that happens, and we invite researchers to come. And so they're able to network with each other, share, present posters, just chat over lunch. And so it's really nice to see these people all get together in the same room, because it doesn't happen very often. And then we also work to write stories on the research on Acadia and Schoodic Institute's website. And so we have research briefs, which are on individual projects, and also year-end reviews, which go over all of the research that happened in the past year. And so if you want to learn more, that's a great place to start to see some of the research that has happened. And that is all about the research.
Thank you, Emma. I should add, we're going to take questions at the end. So if you could just hold your questions, we're going to have everybody come up and we'll take questions then. So raise your hand if you've had, how many of you have had a research permit in Acadia? How many of you have done research, but maybe it was before sort of the permit process started? Great. Well, you're part of our community of science here in Acadia, and you can really see that trajectory of how we do science has changed over time. And so another true false question, raise your hand if you think it's true that shotgun ornithology was practiced in Acadia. Most people are raising their hands in the room. And so, yes, that is correct. And we're going to hear a little more about bird ecology from Seth Benz. Seth actually started his career in Acadia in 1991 as a ranger. And then he came back in 2011 as a seasonal ranger. And he started doing bird programs out at Schoodic Point. He had his park uniform on and had a little table. And of course, a lot of people wanted to talk to him. And they were so popular that the director here at the time asked him to stay on permanently. And so Seth Benz, bird ecology director. Do I use this one or that one? That's your clicker.
So how many people know what a spark bird is and who has one? Great. A gray catbird, a relatively common bird, about the size of a cardinal, inspired my interest in birds. It is one of 11,000 species of birds in the world, one of 474 species of birds officially recognized in the state of Maine. Recent studies estimate that there are 50 billion individual birds in the world. That's roughly a flock of 6 birds for every individual on the planet. Now imagine thousands of birds passing over Acadia National Park in a single night. Look at that number for May 14th of this year. Nearly 400,000 individual birds passing overhead while many of us were asleep. Cumulatively, from mid-March through just a couple of nights ago, over 28 million birds have flown by, and we're still counting this year. This should impress you. Tonight's forecast is for a volume of over 10,000 birds per kilometer per night, which is calculated by the total distance flown by all migratory birds above an area, Hancock County, since the start of the night. So this usually gets going a little bit later than right now, divided by the average distance to cross the area or to cross Hancock County. So that's how they derive those numbers. So you see that tonight we have a high expectation for migratory birds moving through and over us. So understanding the abundance of a species is crucial, a crucial first step in conservation. By properly counting what's out there, we learn what species might be vulnerable and can track how species patterns change over time. In other words, we can better understand our data baselines. Our bird ecology program here combines seasonal bird monitoring with annual life cycle activities to understand the dynamics of species interactions. We are guided by questions such as, when do birds return from their wintering grounds? What is the abundance and distribution of nesting birds? Is that changing? What are birds eating and when? Which species and how many migrate through this region? Which species and how many spend the winter here? What birds vocalize here? Do we recognize them all? A pillar of all the bird work in and around Acadia is aided by public engagement with the collection of data. So even though many of you said you don't have a permit, many of you have participated under those of us who have permits. I'm thinking of you, Deb Priest. One shining example is the Fall Hawk Watch atop Cadillac Mountain. 2024 will be the 30th year of this study. The ongoing effort is one of collaboration between park rangers, Schoodic Institute staff, and over the past 3 decades, the help of more than 60 citizen scientists, hawk spotters, and counters, as well as an annual season average of 4,000 visitors. Death by shotgun blast awaited most day-flying migratory birds of prey during the late 1800s through the 1930s. The hawks use energy-saving wind currents along mountain ridges to give them lift and propel them to food-rich areas to the south. Some species go as far as South America to spend what is our winter. The hawks were lured closer to the mountain ridges, to the treetops, by gunners yanking strings tethered to pigeons to make them flail and scream. And the hawks would dive bomb or come down lower thinking they were getting easy prey, only to be met with a shotgun blast. Thousands of birds of prey, eagles, falcons, red-tailed hawks, sharp-shinned hawks, and more were slaughtered. This is a picture from Hawk Mountain Sanctuary in Pennsylvania, where the shooting was stopped in 1934, but often went on elsewhere in the world. However, laws prohibiting shooting were eventually passed, and hawk watch counting sites have sprung up and are now worldwide. From the 1940s to the 1960s, population trend data alerted conservationists to the decline of species such as peregrine falcons, bald eagles, and osprey. And it wasn't only because of shooting, it had to do with agrochemicals, DDT, DDE, those sorts of things. Well, I had the good fortune of working at Hawk Mountain Sanctuary from 1976 through 1984. I then came to Acadia, as Catherine said, in 1991, and I was inspired to draft a proposal for a hawk watch in the park. In 95, the hawk watch was implemented, even though I had moved on. So volunteers like Angie King Johnston, the Zemans from Bucksport, and others have been spotting and counting hawks ever since. They also now teach visitors how to identify hawks in flight. They educate anyone who will listen about raptor life histories, the mechanics of migratory routes and timing, food webs, habitats, and how the data is banked with the Hawk Migration Association of North America. Our decades of data are shedding new light on species population trends and timing. There are other Schoodic Institute bird research projects, education, and monitoring stories that I could tell you tonight, but I'm going to stick with just this one for ease of simplicity. And I wouldn't be here this evening if not for a chance encounter with a bellicose gray catbird when I stumbled upon its nest. The nest had 4 stunning turquoise green eggs, about a ½ inch in length and oval shaped. That 5-minute episode, when I think back on it, was the spark that ignited my curiosity with nature and birds. These 4 catbird eggs symbolize the vital ingredients that have shaped my career and are a powerful reminder of why I feel so privileged to be speaking here this evening. What I would like to know is what fires your curiosity? What originally inspired or ignited your passion for nature? A spark bird, perhaps? Perhaps some sort of plant if you're into botany. Maybe you had a supportive person, a family member, a friend, a mentor. Many people, when asked this question, respond by recalling a special place, a backyard, a grandparent's garden, some body of water, or a nature preserve, perhaps a national park. And more importantly, how do you sustain that curiosity? How do you keep the fire burning? A lot of folks tell me it's having a sense of belonging, identifying with a group of like-minded people working on similar causes. I would like to suggest to you that along with these guys here, these folks here, Schoodic Institute is just such a place. Thank you.
Birds definitely keep my fire going. So I would like you to raise your hand or identify yourself on Zoom if you have worked or currently work as an early career professional with Schoodic Institute. See a bunch of hands raised here. I'm going to raise my hand. And I think, do we have some hands raised on Zoom? Yes, we do. So since 2019, we have really increased our support and our emphasis on early career positions, starting with 4 technicians to now 14 positions across research, restoration, communication, administration, citizen science, all the diversity of the things that we do as a science team. We also have early career positions doing that. And we wouldn't be able to do it without Shannon O'Brien, our science engagement coordinator, who first visited Schoodic Institute as a student in the University of Maine's Ecology and Environmental Sciences course 217 that does a sort of overnight field experience. And for many years, they've been coming here to Schoodic Institute. And then she came back as an ecology technician in 2020 and 2021, and now serves as our science engagement coordinator. Shannon.
How that works. Cool. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight to learn a bit more about Schoodic Institute. I'm Shannon O'Brien, the Science Engagement Coordinator. I aim to give you all some insight into our early career program and how we support that diverse array of emerging professionals in such a special place. In my role, I provide the structure for the busy summer season for our early career professionals, what we call ECPs, and I'll probably call it that from here on out. Here are many of them pictured here. ECPs come from all over the country and range from those currently in college to recent graduates. They join us for 8-week internships, 5-month technicianships, or even 10-month fellowships. They come ready to embrace the coast of Maine for a prescribed amount of time, knowing that they will be jumping into our busy season. These are scientists, educators, and science communicators. They work with resource managers, their peers, volunteers, and other staff to advance many of the projects that will be mentioned here tonight. These teams measure plants, weigh seaweed, and conduct long-term monitoring in the park. They record and tell stories, present findings, and work alongside citizen scientists and volunteers to collect a lot of the citizen science, climate change data we contribute to here at Schoodic. As Catherine mentioned, I myself started out as a seasonal technician for Schoodic Institute. My first summer out of college, I came here with very little experience, and the variety of projects I worked on served as an effective way for me to discover what excited me. By my second year, I realized that working within a community and any chance to be in the Rocky Intertidal, especially if there were crabs afoot, was what I looked forward to. I guess Seth would say I have a spark animal, the Jonah crab. My interest in staying in Maine and an uptick in capacity to support a larger ECP team provided me with the avenue to become the coordinator I am today. I'm proud to now have a hand in the process of offering others the same opportunity I had after college. I now get to facilitate the experience of living and working in a place of science, wonder, and community. And that's what Schoodic is for a lot of people, a place of wonder, science, and community, a place of transition and of opposing forces. The sea meets the land, the quiet intertidal is adjacent to bustling mountain summits, and the seasonal swell of the community, both researchers in the park, local residents, and tourists alike. We offer support to foster early career skills, but Acadia provides the landscape to embrace transformation in a dynamic setting. Former ECPs have gone on to graduate school programs, the National Park Service and other land management agencies, consulting firms, other nonprofits, and the list goes on. That is the impact that we have. It's beyond the data point and behind the published stories. We recognize we're a gathering place for those interested in the future of conservation, and we strive to make their experience meaningful. We want this place to help them springboard into their next adventure with the skills needed to succeed. We do not know what the future holds for the current early career cohort, for Acadia, nor most other places on Earth. We don't yet know how plants will react in different conditions, if certain birds will continue to be present, or how visitors will experience Acadia in the generations that follow us. The future is uncertain, but with leadership from staff scientists and the assistance of many remarkable ECPs, we can continue to closely monitor resources on the ground here in Acadia. By supporting early career positions, we're able to also play a part in training the next wave of conservation leaders. They represent the hope for conservation, and with their time here, they're already on track to contribute towards meaningful work in the climate change world. Schoodic Institute supports the park through the collaboration of scientists, educators, and communicators, both the ephemeral ECPs as well as the rooted full-time staff. We work to create spaces for the community to come together and share ideas, and for early career teams to live and work. The ECPs are a critical part of how we advance projects. They put in the work that accumulates to results. They spend months on end embracing Acadia's terrain, its weather, its visitors, and often its bugs, to gather the basis for much of the work we share here tonight. They're an invaluable part of the work we do, and we strive to be their biggest supporter as they launch into their careers. Together, with the support of many of you here tonight, we will continue to inspire science, learning, and community for a changing world here in Acadia and beyond.
Thank you, Shannon. So how many of you use iNaturalist? Oh, nice. A lot of hands. All right. How about eBird? Oh, okay, good number of eBirds. So as Seth and Emma mentioned, so you do have research permits in Acadia through many of us and our colleagues, and you are part of Schoodic Science, and you are among the 11,600 people who have contributed observations of biodiversity in Acadia National Park since 2016. Another one of those contributors is Kyle Lima, who participated in a Schoodic Institute led. That was back when iNaturalist was just getting started, and we surveyed biodiversity the old-fashioned way by actually collecting specimens. Kyle then volunteered with the bird ecology program in 2014 and worked as a biodiversity technician in 2017 before joining the staff as data analyst in 2022. Kyle.
All right, can everyone hear me? Sweet. Thanks, Catherine, and thanks everybody for coming tonight. Let's see here. So I'd like to start with a quick story, which begins all the way back in 1880. An adventurous group of young men from Harvard University traveled to what is now Acadia National Park, where we are today. They called themselves the Champlain Society, and during the summers, they explored the region focusing on their different specialties: birds, plants, geology, and a lot more. They recorded their observations in logbooks, keeping detailed notes of their study, and today these notebooks have been preserved and digitized by the Mount Desert Island Historical Society. And these are a really great example of historical data that can be used to help understand change here in Acadia. Again, I'm Kyle Lima. I'm a data analyst here with Schoodic, and my work focuses on interpreting and sharing these stories of change that we can learn from data like what the Champlain Society was collecting back in the late 1800s. Today, however, we don't see logbooks filled with handwritten data very often. They've taken on a sort of a different digital form. And those are iNaturalist and eBird, right? These are a couple perfect examples. And these two platforms where people can submit sightings of biodiversity from anywhere in the world, and they're accessible for anybody to access. My colleagues and I work with these data in many different ways, and one example of this is when we worked with the Mount Desert Island Historical Society, as well as other local partners, on a project that we called Landscape of Change. This is where we compared historical data, like the data collected by the Champlain Society, to modern day observations from iNaturalist and eBird. And we found some really interesting changes, right? So passenger pigeon, now extinct, the Champlain Society found and saw the species on Norumbega Mountain in 1880. The cliff swallow used to be a common nesting bird, but today they're very rarely seen at all in the park. On the other side, we found that species that used to live far to our south are now present or even common here. These are turkey vulture, tufted titmouse, and wood thrush, for example, among many others. And you might also be familiar with house sparrow, European starling, and rock pigeon. These are three species that were introduced to North America. And back when the Champlain Society was here exploring this region, those species weren't here. But today they're common. And without this historical knowledge or the abundance and accessibility of iNaturalist and eBird data, understanding these important changes would be much more difficult. And this is just one example of how we use these citizen science or digital logbook data from these two platforms, iNaturalist and eBird. Since spring 2022, we've been running this early detection system that helps alert park managers to when a forest pest species was found in the park. One example of a forest pest species is hemlock woolly adelgid, which is an insect that will eventually most likely kill a hemlock tree that they are feeding on. And these were first detected in the park about 2 years ago. This project also informs managers about threatened and endangered species. And altogether, this system helps alert managers of new locations where species are and informs future management actions. We've also built a display in the Welcome Center here on our campus, right down in Rockefeller Hall. It shows recent sightings that people who have submitted iNaturalist or eBird observations to the park. It shows this recent, what are people seeing? And we're using these platforms also to help collect data for numerous different projects and to create models that we can use to prioritize conservation efforts. And of course, I'm just choosing sort of a subset of these projects. There's a lot more that sort of interact with these platforms in different ways. And they've truly become a critical part of the science that we do, which means that anybody here who just raised their hand and has participated in these two have contributed very valuable data. So thank you. And so I'm hopeful that hearing these stories and learning about these projects will help inspire you to join us in participating and submitting observations to these platforms. Not only will your efforts help us learn more about the change we're experiencing today and help managers better serve Acadia National Park, but like the Champlain Society, your observations could be just as useful, if not more, 100 years from now. Thanks.
The Landscape of Change project is a really good example of how our work at Schoodic Institute extends beyond Acadia National Park. And so that effort was across all of Mount Desert Island, not just within Acadia. And if we think about beyond Acadia and think about the coast of Maine and think about the 19 million pounds of seaweed, mostly rockweed, that was harvested in Maine last year, 19 million pounds of mostly rockweed. What percentage do you think that is of the total amount of rockweed, that stringy seaweed that covers the intertidal zone of Maine? 19 million pounds. What percentage of all the rockweed do you think that is? 2, 1, 10? Well, we actually have no idea. We don't know. And so next you're going to learn a little bit about how we're trying to answer that question from Marine Ecology Director Hannah Weber, who started her Schoodic career in 2009 as part of a team that developed and delivered scientist, teacher, student partnership programs, including what is now the Dragonfly Mercury Project, which is in more than 100 national parks across the country and wildlife refuges and other public lands. Hannah. This one, you can use it, just talk right into it. Okay, I'm just staying close to it.
I would assume that the forward button is the one that's disappeared.
If I like stand up, it means.
Okay. Hello, hello. We're leaving the park, people. Get ready. I can figure out how to use the clicker. Park yet. We'll leave in a second. That's because you went from Zoom to. Hold on. I love this crowd. A former boss once told me, oh, citizen science, that's just sending kids out into the woods with notebooks. I have heard similar things from other people. And as somebody who came from a background of legally defensible data, I've had some discomfort with citizen science myself through time. But I work on a project called Project ASCO, and I have to respectfully disagree with my former boss and the others and my former self. This is rockweed, that stringy stuff. Rockweed is an intertidal seaweed, an alga. It's not stringy. It's tall and branching, it's sinuous. It creates this beautiful, flexible, green, olive, yellow, synchronous sort of waving motion of vegetation at high tide. You guys can all do this later. And then it collapses into a blanket at low tide. Rockweed creates the environment at high tide and at low tide and serves as a backdrop of that eat or get eaten world of the rocky intertidal shores. As mentioned, it's also a harvested marine resource. Rockweed is right, it's right there. It's in the liminal space between high tide and low tide, between the ocean and the land. And so harvesting happens right there in front of us. Is rockweed over harvested? Is it under harvested? And how would we know? And we need to know because sustainable resource management, we might have a little bit of a history of not sustainable resource management as humans. And we will get closer to sustainable resource management with more and better data. So to put harvest in context of what there is on the coast of Maine, we need to know how much rockweed there is. And for algae, that's not counting, it's weighing. There is no standard way to weigh rockweed. And many of the non-standard ways are cumbersome or they're inefficient. They're destructive, that doesn't help, or they're very, very expensive. And again, harvest happens right in the intertidal zone, right where the land meets the sea, and it is a place that people care about a lot. And so we kind of wondered, well, can caring people be part of the more and better data solution? We thought so, and we had a funder who thought so, and so we invented a bag. We invented a bag. I know it doesn't look like a bag, but it's going to turn into one. And we invented a training. And we invited people to come weigh rockweed with us along the coast of Maine. And our partners are non-traditional partners in research science. They're not researchers, they're not technicians. They are just wonderful people who want to help and want to enter into partnership for reasons of their own. Again, we've left the confines of Acadia for this project. And working along the coast of Maine, the stakes feel like I just advanced a slide accidentally. The stakes feel somewhat high. It's the weighing rockweed science that's on the line. As sort of an ambassador outside of Acadia, up and down the coast of Maine, it's Schoodic science that's on the line. And often it's basically the practice of science itself that's on the line. And listening to partners before a training, I can tell that the stakes are kind of high for them because there's often talk of like, I'm not sure my knees can handle this. I'm not sure that you're going to accept my data. I'm not sure I can do this. We run the training and people get trained and we get to work. And and the work looks like this. Together, we get down into the seaweed and we wrestle the seaweed and we wrangle the seaweed and we flop seaweed and we swaddle seaweed into our bags, or we burrito seaweed into our bags, or we bundle or cuddle or snug seaweed into the bags, and we come up with new ways to talk about really how it is that we're putting seaweed into the bags to then weigh. And then we're done. And the data are collected and the seaweed is left intact and the pictures are shared and people are trained, so much so that in 2023, over 90 partners at over 40 locations up and down the coast have weighed more than 1,600 pounds of rockweed, which is contributing to giving us a better picture of how much rockweed there is on the coast of Maine. The bag is necessary to weigh rockweed up and down the coast of Maine with caring project partners. The bag is necessary so that citizen scientists can kneel down and swaddle with us and come to a common experience, come closer to a common understanding of how we think about rockweed, how we think about science, and honestly, just how heavy rockweed really is. It's very heavy. The bag is necessary not to send kids out, but to make it easier for people to come into research, to come into a shared practice, to come into partnership. So call it what you will, citizen science, participatory science, public participation in scientific research. It's a tool, and when done right, it's a partnership that everybody coming into it gets something out of when they put something in. And really up and down the coast of Maine, Project ASCO and Schoodic really couldn't ask for the better partners than we've had. Thank you.
Take your bag. People can take a look at that afterwards if you want to get an up close look at the bag. So we're going to stay zoomed out from Acadia a little bit. True or false, Acadia is one of the fastest warming regions in North America. True. The Gulf of Maine, which determines a lot about our climate here and all along the coast, is warming about 3 times faster than the global average for oceans around the world. And this has had a huge impact on our air temperatures and on our weather as well. And someone who thinks about this a lot is Chris Nadeau, who first came to Schoodic Point in 2015 while he was looking for a study site for his PhD. He was only about halfway down the loop road when he fell in love and decided that this would be one of his sites, whether or not it was going to work for his projects. And he's been the climate adaptation scientist at Schoodic Institute since 2022.
Awesome. Thank you very much, everyone. And wow, great climate change knowledge. I'm so impressed with that. So there I was at the top of the mountain. The wind was blowing so hard I could barely walk, and the fog was so thick I could barely see my hand in front of my face. But I still got out my camera and I tried to yell over the wind in a video. And I yelled, "Today is day 21 of the Sustainable Summits Project, and I'm on top of Sargent Mountain in Acadia National Park." And at that time, I had been hiking nearly every day for about 3 weeks, and I still had about 2 weeks to go. And in total, over those 5 weeks, I hiked to the summit of 31 mountain summits, ranging from southern Massachusetts to central Maine. I hiked over 60 miles, up over 15,000 feet. And the reason I did all that hiking was climate change. Or more specifically, the potential effects of climate change on this little plant called three-tooth cinquefoil. And many of you might be familiar with this, but if you're not, then I'll pass this little guy around for folks to see. And so, as Catherine said, I'm a climate change adaptation scientist here at Schoodic Institute. And what that means is that I work with natural resource managers like those here at Acadia to try to ensure that the money that we're investing in natural resource management today will continue to provide benefits in the future as climates change. And as all of you know, climate change is a big issue here at Acadia, in part because our climate is already changing so quickly. And so, for example, temperatures have warmed over 3 degrees Fahrenheit, and as apparently all of you already know, that makes us one of the fastest warming regions in North America. And those changes in climate are having big effects on our ecosystems, and really in the future, those effects are just going to get stronger and stronger. And that's especially true for that little plant that's getting passed around in the crowd right now, three-toothed cinquefoil. So three-tooth cinquefoil is this plant that mostly occurs north of us here in Acadia, but is really abundant along the rocky coastlines, like out on Schoodic Point and on top of our mountain summits. And it's a plant that we're using to restore areas on mountain summits that have been degraded from decades of human trampling here in Acadia National Park. And it's doing really well in those restoration sites right now, but unfortunately, it's got a bit of a bleak future. And so models predict that 98% of the places that are suitable for 3-2 cinquefoil now will become unsuitable in the future as climates change. And so that leaves us in a bit of a conundrum. We've got this species that we're investing in restoration now, but those restorations might just fail in a few decades as climates change. And so a few years back, we worked with park managers to try to think about how can we solve that conundrum. And so it turns out that one of the most recommended climate change adaptation strategies for dealing with that kind of conundrum is to go to warmer locations and collect 3-2 cinquefoil. Presumably the plants at those warmer locations are adapted to warmer temperatures. We bring those here, plant them at our restoration sites, and maybe that will make the populations more resilient to these increasing temperatures. And so that's a strategy that's being implemented all over the world with dozens of different species, but it's almost never been tested. So we could be investing a lot of resources in a strategy that is ineffective, or worse yet, causes more harm than good. And so we set out to provide, or before we really wanted to implement that strategy here at Acadia, we set out to provide one of the first rigorous tests of that strategy. And that's why I was hiking all those mountains a few years back. At each one of those mountains, I collected 100 cinquefoil plants. We brought those plants back to Acadia National Park. We planted them in a few different gardens, one right outside here in Schoodic Point. But we planted in a few different gardens throughout the park in such a way that we could learn if adding warm-adapted individuals or individuals from warmer locations could help our restorations be more resilient to climate change. And we're learning a lot of really surprising things from that experiment. So far we're seeing that indeed 3-2 cinquefoil does seem to be sensitive or stressed by warmer temperatures. It doesn't grow nearly as well in warmer temperatures, and that's exactly what the models predict. But what we're not seeing is that adding these individuals from warmer locations is mitigating that stress. So here's an example of a strategy that people are implementing all over the world, but one of the first rigorous tests that we've conducted suggests that that strategy might not always work. And that's just one example of dozens of climate change adaptation strategies that have been recommended and are being implemented by natural resource managers around the world, but almost none of those strategies. Those tests, natural resource managers around the world are themselves on top of a mountain in the fog. They're being blown around by the wind of the latest and greatest untested climate change adaptation strategy. And they're really worried that they're walking the future of natural resource management towards a cliff. But here at Schoodic Institute, we're really committed to clearing that fog, to providing tests of those climate change adaptation strategies to help ensure that the money that we're investing in natural resource management today will continue to provide benefits in the future as climates change. Thank you.
Science team, I'm gonna come up to the front. So we're gonna take questions now. And we do need to use the microphones so those of you in the auditorium, just wait for a microphone so that our friends on Zoom can hear your question. Questions?
Hello. One of your slides showed that there was an increase in bald eagle population and a decrease in sharp-shinned hawk population. Does the increase in the eagle population have anything to do with the decrease in the sharp-shinned population? Or that's just they're independent of each other?
Yeah, that's independent of one another, and there's reasons. I mean, basically, the reason that we do the counts in the first place is to get a grip on the population trends as that slide, and thank you for noticing that. So sharp shins, if you saw it, it sort of went down and it leveled out and then it went down again. And it's believed that sharp-shinned hawks are victims of a rising Cooper's hawk population. And not anything having to do with eagles, which are principally a mostly coastal bird or water-related bird that's hunting fish. So, and to my knowledge, there's no interaction between the habitats of those two.
So then a follow-up question would be, do you know why the Cooper hawk population is increasing?
Yeah, they get along with humans. They're more adaptable to our bird feeding strategies in our backyards, and for some odd reason, the Cooper's hawks are becoming more urbanized, if you will. They can live very, very close to humans, even though they're a wild hawk, and they're a larger version of the sharp-shinned hawk, and they will take kestrels. So they're having a pretty big impact on some of those birds.
They do well around humans.
Yeah.
They are the raccoons of the bird world.
Yeah. Sharp-shins are a little more reclusive and secretive.
Okay.
And so we just don't see those as much as we're seeing Cooper's hawks.
Gotcha. We have sharp-shinned on our property that have a nest.
Yep.
So
they're around.
So I was just wondering. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, this is very interesting. I have a couple questions. The first one is, what would you say is the most unique research that goes on here? You've mentioned some things, but you also said there's a lot that goes on here. Well, what is something that most people don't know that goes on? That's the first question. I'm going to ask one other. Tell us what is the most important thing we can do individually to help for the future?
I'll start on your first question. And so I don't know that there's a whole lot of research that is really unique that happens here. I feel like the more unique part is how we do the research and how we go about it, and how closely park managers work with the Schoodic Institute staff and researchers and communicators and a lot of other people, so that everyone is able to get a lot more out of the research, because we all work together in creating the research projects, working throughout the research projects, and changing them when they need to be changed, and then going over the results and publishing them and sharing them, which I feel like isn't something that is super typical with a lot of research that happens. So it's always hard when people ask, like, what's your favorite project that happens? And it's hard to pick one, but I feel like what's really exciting is how we go about the whole process.
Second question, my answer, of course, is participate with iNaturalist and eBird, because it is immediately, being integrated into park management decisions based off of, especially if you can find these species that they're interested in. So what I didn't say is there's 180, maybe 181 species on that list that park managers get reports about. So if any of those 180 species are seen by any of you, anybody else visiting, they will be known to park management, and they can therefore go on and make future decisions for how to deal with that. So that's my answer.
I would just add that we are working with partners such as what Hannah illustrated, but in the biodiversity, the iNaturalist collection of data, we're working with some of the land trusts in the area to essentially create early detection SWAT teams, if you will. And that's you all who go out and do your observations. Because we, in Hancock and Washington counties, at least, we collect any iNaturalist observation that occurs, and we're able to synthesize that information and get information to like Coastal Mountain Land Trust or Maine Coast Heritage Trust to alert them to the fact that you folks are finding these plants at certain places, and it'll be an early detection, and we can then theoretically mitigate whatever the invasive species might be.
We're going to take a question from our Zoom audience now. So Hannah, this one is directed to you. It's nice and important to know how much rockweed is out there, but one of the things that's really important is the rate of regeneration compared to the rate of harvest. And so if you could share a little bit about how we're either doing citizen science with regard to that question or what other research is helping with that.
Thanks for that question. Right, the average regrowth rate or the growth rate in Frenchman Bay is around 12 centimeters a year, or give or take around 4 inches per year. And there are a lot of concerns about sustainable harvest practices, which cuts leaving 16 inches from the base of a rockweed algae. And so the question really is, does rockweed grow enough in 1 year for height-wise for people to come back and harvest 1 year later? And with that regrowth rate, it might be suggestive that no, it is not sustainable to go back to the same location, you know, the next year to harvest again. There are lots of other ways to harvest and to rotate, and that becomes management. And like Emma has said, and like Chris mentioned, and like Kyle mentioned, everybody's mentioned, you know, that it's really cool to be able to work at a place where science goes to management. And while we have talked extensively about science going to park management, this science goes to help manage a resource along the whole coast of Maine. So there are other initiatives that we're working on that are not citizen scientist based that do help understand how quickly rockweed does regenerate both the biomass and the height after a harvest. And that work is ongoing. And harvest is not just about how the rockweed is affected, it's also about how the whole ecosystem is affected, and we're doing work there as well. So thanks.
Yes, my question is for Hannah again. When you're weighing, how do you determine the evaporation? And I mean, if the sun's out, or is it mid-tide, or there must be a fair amount of evaporation. I harvest seaweed often, and it's almost a different color at certain times than when it's freshly exposed from the sea. So how do you control for the weight difference between those two time periods?
Right. So it's in our protocol that we ask people to go out within, you know, a certain time relative to low tide. So that's, you know, it's in the protocol. That's how we control for it. In our data that we get after people have gone out, we do correct for when low tide was and when the data were submitted, which is in the field so we can see how long ago it had been. We also collect data on the weather so we can correct for that. So there are some correction factors that happen after the data collection. So a little bit quality assurance, follow the protocol, and a little bit quality control. What does it look like when it comes in and when we start working with it? So we work with the data on both ends you're right, it's crispy, crunchy, you know, black strands, you know, after a midday low tide when it's super hot, it's crunchy stuff. And, you know, if you go out there at a low tide and it's 6 o'clock in the morning and it's a foggy day, then it stays nice and pliable for the entire low tide. So yeah, something we have to work with.
So sticking with rockweed, I, for about 12 years, actually did a little research, not with the rockweed, but with some of the critters underneath it. And I'm wondering whether, especially given the harvesting that goes on, whether people are looking at the impact on the populations of the critters that live in and around and under the rockweed?
Thanks for that question. And yes, there was a team at the University of Maine called the CRASH team, Conserving Rockweed Animal Systems for Sustainable Harvest, who looked at exactly that, who looked at not only how rockweed recovered from harvest, but also what there were for invertebrates prior to harvest, right after harvest, and a year after harvest, and looked at also the benthic ecosystem. So, what was growing underneath the rockweed. And then at the other end of the spectrum, looked at the bird populations to see how they were faring as well. So it was a pretty extensive study that looked at the whole ecosystem, not just the rockweed in and of itself. So there are people who are looking at that. Thank you.
How does one go about finding out about volunteer opportunities for either the permitted projects or counting birds or helping the little amphibians across the road or, anything like that?
SchoodicInstitute.org. Get on our newsletter list, and you can find out that way. Sarah there, who's handling the microphones, is our marketing person. And you could just tell her. And but seriously, we do have announcements for these kind of things. We did a little eBird and Merlin workshop this morning at Fraser Point, and that was advertised. We can do another one. Yeah, so you just have to, I guess, be alert and be tuned into SchoodicInstitute.org.
Yeah, and if we're going to pitch our volunteer opportunities, then I'll take the opportunity to do that. So something we're doing, I mentioned summit restoration. And so one very important thing about restoring degraded areas on summits is to get soil to the tops of the mountains. And that's easy on Cadillac Mountain when you can drive a car to the top of the mountain. It's less easy on other mountains where you can't drive a car to the top. And so we actually last year, about 200 volunteers carried 4,000 pounds of soil to the top of Sargent and Penobscot Mountain for our restoration project. And we restored about 25 sites using that soil. We're doing that again this year. There'll be opportunities weekly on Wednesdays, I think, to carry soil to the summit of the mountain. So if you're an avid hiker interested in getting out, doing some hiking, help the park. Don't mind putting 5 or so pounds of soil in your backpack to go up for that hike. That'd be great. Thank you.
Question for Shannon. How do you become an ECP, an early career professional?
You apply. It's very much like Seth said. We announce our jobs through our newsletter. They make the front page of our I was about to say our web page for the months in spring is typically when we're hiring people, although it's been pushed back to include winter. So as soon as January, we start posting positions. So be on our newsletter. I certainly make sure it makes it into that. Sarah makes sure it makes it in our social media, and just being alert in that spring season when it seems like everyone is hiring for the summer.
Light pollution is an increasing worldwide problem and is well known to have negative impacts on insect populations and bird populations as well. Does the Institute monitor that at all, particularly thinking of the Bar Harbor MDI region? It may be increasing, but I don't know.
So I do know that I believe the park is still in process for dark sky certification. Is that true, Nick? So that would indicate some sort of mitigation around that light pollution that occurs in Bar Harbor, but it also could be one of the reasons why we're not yet dark sky certified. It's much darker over here. You can see the Milky Way from Schoodic Point on most any summer night, and it's beautiful over here. There's also a new national monument in the state of Maine called Katahdin Woods and Waters, and it is a certified dark sky national monument or park. So yeah, I mean, I think folks are aware of it here and are working with that process, but we're not yet certified. I will say on the light pollution having to do with birds, through the work of eBird and the collection of data and the kind of data that Kyle analyzes, we know, especially in the heavy corridors. So I started out with some statistics about the flow of birds here. Well, if we were in Texas or the sort of Mississippi flyway, the central flyway in the continent, many more millions of birds actually come through that way. And I'm happy to say that there are organizations, it's called Lights Out. And so when we get those predictive forecasts of heavy flight nights, there are cities that are literally turning off their lights so that birds are not disoriented by the light pollution that occurs. So we're making progress slowly but surely with these things, and it's helping both insects and birds.
Hi, I'd like to ask, do you have any data regarding Atlantic puffin population and how they have been impacted by these rising temperatures and light pollution and all these things you are mentioning?
So in a past life, I worked for Project Puffin, restoring island colonies here in the state. And we often go out to Petite Mannan Island, which is the closest puffin island to where we're sitting right now. We do have data through connections or partnerships with Seabird Institute, formerly Project Puffin. That's located in Bremen, Maine, down by Damariscotta in Muscongas Bay. And then the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Coastal Islands National Wildlife Refuge, has a whole slew of islands that they work with. And so there is the exact data would be available through their respective websites. I will say that what we're discovering from the warming that has been talked about here is that the Gulf of Maine, the water temperature rise is creating shifts in phytoplankton base, as well as the food fish that the puffins and terns want to feed on. And we have had several years of collapse where warm water has penetrated the colder Gulf of Maine, bringing essentially fish that are too big and wide. They look like a big silver dollar instead of we think of sardines. If you think of a sardine, a long skinny fish, that's what terns and puffins like to feed their young. But if they get one of these butterfish, which comes out of the warmer Gulf Stream, it's round and silver dollar-like. The young birds and pufflings cannot swallow the fish. It's too big for their gape. And we've had years where the correct food was not available, and we've had population collapse in certain years. It's happened 3 times over the past 15 years. And with puffins, the threat to puffins and the puffin populations, they lay 1 egg a year, and they don't lay that egg until they're at least 5 years of age. So even though they're long-lived, when you have a failed class of young pufflings, so to speak, in 5 years or 6 years, when they would become sexually mature, they're not there. And so if that happens too often, you just won't have a sustainable population going forward. So that's the issue. There are seabird biologists out on a lot of islands right now as we speak who are aiding the birds, helping to protect them, keeping predators at bay, chasing away gulls, and watching out for the reproductive and productivity of those species. Thanks for that question. It's coming. There's a microphone is making its way.
Someone asked, what could we do to help out? And I haven't heard anything about reducing fossil fuel use and slowing down and mitigating climate change as a group of people, say buying an electric car or doing something different yourself in your house. Do you agree with that?
I think that's above our pay grade.
So there's a phenomenon that we deal with a lot here called the curse of knowledge, which means when you know something so well, it's really easy to forget that other people don't know. So what you just suggested is an example of something that we all think about all the time, and it kind of goes without saying. So thank you for making us say it.
Let's give these guys another round of applause. I'm Susie Acord. I'm the development manager here at Schoodic Institute, and man, I work with a lot of smart people. Thank you to all of you guys for joining us this evening and making Schoodic part of your community. And we love having you guys out here for all of our events. I wanted to tell you about a couple more upcoming events that we have, and I also wanted to let you know, we talked a little bit about making sure that you're on our newsletter and following us on social media. So probably the majority of you guys are already getting our newsletter, but in the case that you're not, one exciting thing that's coming out soon, this is our old annual report, but our 2023 annual report is at the printer right now. And for those of you who are supporters of Schoodic Institute through donations, you will be receiving your hard copy pretty soon for our 2023 annual report. And that's another great place to get some of the updates about the research that we're doing. We have a really wonderful map in here that shows where all of the permits are. Emma showed you one version of that earlier. And then we have some stories from our work in our annual report. So if you support Schoodic, you will get a hard copy. If you want to receive a digital copy, or if you'd like us to drop one in the mail, either join our newsletter or shoot us a note. Sarah or myself can certainly mail you one. We'd be happy to do that. Also, if you would like to take one of these flyers home, they're available on the table outside. And this has some of our upcoming events. So this evening's lecture is a part of our summer lecture series. And our next couple of lectures that are coming up are on July 16th with Scott Weidensaul. He's a best-selling author and ornithologist. He's a researcher that we work with here in Acadia, and he's going to give a fantastic presentation on A World on the Wing, the Global Odyssey of Migratory Birds. On August 13th, we have a really special event with Margie Patlak. She is an award-winning science writer and photographer, and she's going to have some of her photography displayed out here in the middle section of Moore Auditorium. And we're also going to do a book signing that day. So if you'd like to read up on Margie, she's going to be here with books. She's going to be talking about her photography, and she's going to be talking about nature's lessons on life, loss, legacy, and the restorative wonder. So I would encourage you guys to get signed up for that. We're also going to do a little wine and cheese tasting before the lecture. So we hope you can join. And then September 10th is our last summer lecture this year with Suzanne Greenlaw. She is an Indigenous postdoctoral scientist working with us. So if you liked what you heard tonight, you'll get a little bit more in September from Suzanne. But I think that you'll be really interested in her presentation as well. And then just one more thing I wanted to tell you about that's not our summer lecture series, but on August 22nd is the 2024 Maine Outdoor Film Festival. So that is done in the Portland area, but they also take the festival all throughout the state of Maine for those of us who don't live that close to the city. So they come out here. We've been doing it for several years, and it is such a cool event. It's a bunch of short films about conservation and outdoor recreation, and it brings to light a lot of really interesting stories and really important topics that, you know, even people doing like some of the work that we're doing, and lots of outdoor recreation stuff. So I've given you a lot to think about. Again, thank you so much for coming. And if you have any questions for our staff, please don't hesitate to come up to them and ask them right now.